nobody's waiting anymore, then I can start. There's a dynamic quality to that stillness. Even when nothing is happening, it's awake. And then when things start happening, action may be necessary, and yet the spaciousness is not lost even in the midst of action, having to deal with things and people. That's our challenge, to bring the spaciousness that we find here, glimpse here, or find it, realize it, into the world when we meet people. And also when we sit still, not to fall from the state that is above thought, so to speak, to the state that is below thought. It can happen. You sit there, and then suddenly a tiredness comes. And then you suddenly, before you know it, you're also in a state of relative peace, but you're moving towards sleep. And you may have met people in this world who have so little thought intelligence. As you know, thought is only a small aspect of intelligence. But there are people who have so little thought going on in their heads, they would be called maybe retarded. There's so little thought that they seem to exist in a state of continuous peace. They may even laugh all the time. And perhaps they are compared to most humans. And they look at you and just laugh, and they know they're not thinking anything. Similar to a little baby. And very similar to a liberated person who is no longer judging you, forming mental images. He also laughs in a very similar way. And so it can happen that some people, many people, are longing to be free of the torture of their own minds. And that's why many people are reaching for some drug. And some of the drugs free you for a little while from the continuous torture of your own mind. Even just drink a couple of stiff drinks, whiskey, and then suddenly you feel a little bit more, there's a more harmonious, the jagged, frantic mind is quiets down a little for a while. It can also happen that drink can awaken your pain body. That's another matter. That's especially in males it can happen. But and so there are other drugs that have a similar effect, and people don't know why they feel so much better. They feel so much better because thinking subsides, is less active, and they don't know that they're in most cases moving towards the sleep state, the unconscious. They are falling below thought, but that can be liberating. If the thought is torture, as it is for many people, their own minds, to fall below thought, at least you have a little bit of relief there with your daily whiskey, or whatever drug it may be. For that reason, I once tried LSD, because people were telling me, oh, it's like meditation, it's like presence, and so I tried it once so that I can answer questions about it. And what seemed to happen was an enormous heightening of sense perceptions. Now, we talked about sense perceptions this weekend, how that there is a portal there also when you look at something, and there's presence, spaciousness, non-labeling. The perception then happens within that field of stillness. And there needs to be alertness for that, presence. When you take that drug, what happened, I found the sensory perception became heightened. It's like turning up the volume on all senses. So visual senses, everything, the colors are vitally alive, every visual perception jumps at you almost. Auditory perceptions, as if somebody had literally turned the volume up and now you can hear even the slightest sound and it sounds loud. Smell becomes very acute, you could even smell a glass of water. Touch becomes acute, it's almost too much even to touch the texture. And so what happens, you're being pushed into presence. You can't move much away from now because the now is jumping at you from through all the senses. So it can be liberating. I can see why sometimes people say it was a great thing to take that. They had a glimpse suddenly into what it means not to live continuously in the future. They were actually being forced into the now. You can't get away if everything shouts at you, every sense. You're in the now. So it can be a little glimpse for people of how wonderful it is not to be continuously away from now. And you haven't got much time for thinking when everything shouts at you, every sense is so acute, you haven't got time to think about it because you're simply perceiving. Well, at least that's how I experienced it. But it seemed the usual state. I prefer it. It's more gentle, and it's actually more awake. It's more. You don't need. We could achieve the same effect if we went into a discotheque, and this is perhaps why people are drawn to places like that, where the music is almost deafening. It's amazing that they can come out of that after 3 hours undamaged. And of course that shuts.
This morning you talked about the pain body and how it goes into your mind and creates thought. And I always assumed that negative emotions were triggered by thoughts. So I'm not quite sure how it works now.
Okay, thank you. The pain body originally developed in humans because of the arising of a mind-made sense of self, which becomes suffering. So the egoic state that we have been talking about creates an enormous amount of suffering on this planet. Humans create that suffering out of that state, which is a state of great lack of fear, of unfulfillment, which they look to fill that sense of lack through greed, through reinforcing their sense of self at the expense of other humans, to use other humans to enhance their self, to accumulate possessions so that they have more to identify with and take them away from others, to adopt a position of rightness, we are right, our belief, our positions, and then you fight a war with others who have a different mental position in order to make them wrong. And so over thousands and thousands of years, more and more suffering is created out of this mental delusion, ultimately, of not knowing who you are. In that sense, you're right that comes, it's created by self-serving thoughts that are imbued with self. So that structurally is never aligned with what is, and that in itself is a state of suffering. So the origin of the pain body lies in identifying with thought, and now what happens is that this accumulated energy of pain body works as a vicious circle where it energizes those thought structures that created it in the first place and feeds on them again. And that's called a vicious circle. So the origin of it is in for humanity lost itself in thought, and so it became suffering was the normal lot for most humans. It still is. And that the accumulated suffering became the pain body, which now energizes the thought structures that created it in the first place and still feeds on them. So it's still thought is feeding the pain body. Thought created it in the first place, now thought is maintaining it and feeding it. And the pain body, in turn, energizes those thought structures and amplifies them. And that's called, therefore we call it a vicious circle, where one feeds and energizes the other. And this is what, when you don't know that that's happening, you're trapped in that vicious circle, which one could say in Eastern terms, that's the wheel, an aspect of the wheel of karma. Karma renews itself, action, reaction, which is, the pain body needs the reaction. Pain body is an aspect of karma. Karma meaning simply unconscious patterns, mental, emotional patterns that you identify with as yourself. And those patterns renew themselves. They create situations and reaction. You could never really come to the end of karma unless the power of the present moment is accessed. Otherwise you have a continuity of time. Past becomes the future. The present is continuously obscured. The future becomes a continuation of the past. So you're right, thought created it in the first place, but now there is a reciprocal movement, a vicious circle in human beings.
Okay, so this relates to something that happened before I came on the retreat. The day before, I was in a phone conversation with someone and I got very angry with them. I put down the phone. And so there was a reaction, some pain and reaction to pain. And I'm still not clear about whether the other person actually could hurt me for real. Felt like he hurt me, and then and I'm not sure now whether it's possible.
Okay. So the person said something to you?
Well, how it was that while I was listening, I had half of my consciousness in the body, and half listening to the words, and was coming this very strong feeling of pain. And then before I know it, I shout at him, put down the phone.
Yes, okay. So this is something like that is the pain body reacting, because the reaction very often is much stronger than the trigger. The trigger may just be a few words, but the pain is far greater often that you feel when the pain body comes up than would be warranted by the words that you hear. The words must have touched the pain bodies. Some pain bodies are awakened by certain words that remind the person of some form of pain, perhaps in childhood. For example, children who were abandoned by their parents. Even the slightest hint, this is only one of many possible examples, and this is to do with your personal pain body, but the personal and the collective become mixed. So if a child was abandoned by their parents, the slightest hint when you're talking to somebody, a friend or a partner, the slightest hint of abandonment, even a person saying, I can't come, we can't meet tonight, I have a headache, or I could trigger it when this pain body that accumulated so much pain when that abandonment happened, and it can serve as a trigger for enormous pain. And all the person said, I don't think I can make it tonight. Oh. And it was far more than that, so that was became the trigger, and it particularly happens when the pain body hasn't taken in much food for a while, so it's actually ready to awaken, and then the right trigger comes, and then that influx of pain comes in. So it's gone now, the event is gone, but of course all you can ever do with the pain body is to be there while it happens, to watch it, to feel the pain, so that it doesn't use your mind. In a closer relationship, you may be able to say to the person, what you just said triggered enormous pain in me. It's strange, but I can feel it right now. If that person is open to it, you may not be able to say it in certain relationships that are more superficial, but with some people, it is wonderful if you live with someone and you have an agreement that whenever you feel pain body, the other person seems to trigger it, that you immediately say what you just said brought up. I suddenly feel an enormous amount of pain. Then it's fine. Then you can both say, oh, and you can bring acceptance to it. It doesn't become thought forms. In this case, it's possible that after you put the phone down, the pain continued because it linked in with your thinking. Yes. So that is a few moments and it was gone because there's already an enormous amount of presence in you. If it hadn't been for that, it would have stayed for much longer, perhaps a few hours, even a day or two. So it's watching it. Of course, nobody can really hurt you. What they can hurt is a mind form, or they can touch the pain that still lives in you. In that sense they could hurt, but all they do is activate that which is already there. Ultimately, people do it to themselves, they hurt themselves. So it is wonderful, and many of you will be finding that pain body attacks become much more short-lived now because of the arising presence. Pain bodies don't stick around for that long anymore and hang in there for days, as sometimes happens if presence is not yet there, feeding for days and days. So pain body is still feeding a little bit, but isn't getting that much food anymore. Yeah. Yes.
I was really in pain.
Yes.
I was very strong. And then suddenly I saw the wind caressing the grass.
The wind caressing the grass.
Yes.
Yes.
And the grass was green, so green. And the pain was gone. I even tried a little poison for it.
Yes. But
because it was really fun.
that seeing of the grass was also thoughtless awareness. It was the arising, the grass is beautiful, but there was more. There was the arising of spacious presence, space consciousness. And suddenly, the little personal self dissolved, because there's such vast power there that the insignificance of that personal event was so clear that it dissolved without any doing on your part. Any reference to nature can be very helpful, just to look at nature, and sometimes amazing to see when the pain body is occupying your body. Sometimes, if it's strong, it is all over. It can be. In some cases, it's only in the stomach or solar plexus area as a throbbing or a heaviness here. In other cases, the pain body can occupy your entire body and actually it feels like glue. And then if you sit next to a tree and maybe some grass or some flowers, and you see how free the tree is compared to this, then you see the little area of pain is just here. The pain is here. There's a blade of grass here, and there's no pain there. And there's a flower here. It exists in that beautiful state of just is. And so you can sometimes see in nature all around you sanity. And the attention suddenly moves from the thoughts that were feeding the pain body, from being trapped in thought, moves out of the prison of thought and becomes presence. And then you can truly see nature suddenly. So you will encounter strange things, changes in the ways in which your pain bodies manifest now because of the arising presence. And very often you may find the pain body arises in its beginning stage, and immediately you feel it, you recognize it, you look at it. Oh, and you feel that energy. And it stays for a little while, and it's gone. It couldn't feed. This is not, don't mistake this for suppressing it. There's no willpower involved. There's no effort involved. You're not holding it down. You're not saying, I will not feel this pain body. I am beyond it. I am the spiritual warrior, which you are, but not as a mind form. You are the spiritual warrior, and the spiritual warrior has a sword, which I call the sword of presence. And with that sword you cut through time. Time is the continuity between past and future. And with the sword of presence, you cut through, and suddenly it opens and there's the gap of now. But that cutting through time is also the cutting through thought, the stream of thought. It's the same thing. When you cut through time, you cut through the stream of thought with that sword of now, of presence. And you even cut through suffering. In the intensity of now, suffering can't survive. Some pain can survive for a little while, not long either. Suffering cannot survive. Suffering is an unhappy me with a story. That cannot survive in now. So yes, you are a spiritual warrior, but don't develop the concept of me, I am the spiritual warrior. I am more of a warrior than you, or whatever. At any moment, the mind can come in with some new self-concept. It's looking, because now that it's losing its self-concepts, it's looking for the next one that is maybe a new one that it can get hold of. And that is often the dilemma for people on the spiritual path. And suddenly you end up with a new self-image that was maybe stronger than the one that just went away. And you've gone all the way to the Buddhist monastery, and before you know it, you become a very important person, because you're now a Buddhist monk. It could happen. Doesn't have to happen. Sometimes it works beautifully. I've met some Buddhist monks who were like little children, free. And the younger monks sometimes are very dignified. They have just adopted a new self-concept. Now in the West, being a Buddhist monk isn't that rewarding for your sense of self, because if you go to a big city with your robes, little children will shout Hare Krishna at you. But if you go to some Eastern countries, then you get a bit more feedback, respect. And some Buddhist monks I know travel first class on Thai Airways because they're given the seats. And so there's potential here for feeling an enhanced sense of self through being a Buddhist monk. Only potential, it doesn't have to happen. The whole structure is designed to remove it, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. The mind is cunning. It's waiting for something else to get hold of. Teacher, the microphone, if you have a question in the back row, 2 people in the back. In the meantime, I'll say something. Teachers, people who become spiritual teachers, now the first thing to realize, if you believe that being a teacher is as an identity, then you're trapped again. It's nobody's identity to be a spiritual teacher. It's a temporary function. I'm a teacher because words come out of my mouth. They come out of my mouth because there's an empty space, so they come. That makes me into a teacher, and not in my identity, but the temporary function. The moment I walk out of here, what teacher is there? There's no teacher left. It's just a person walking. The teaching is over. While it happens, I may be a teacher. It's a function, not an identity. And so the challenge of every spiritual teacher, and some of you are already teachers in your own capacity, and many others of you are becoming spiritual teachers. How could you not? You could not teach as this new state of consciousness arises in you. You have to teach, not always in the same way, not necessarily this directly, but in one way or another, you will teach. And you may even teach directly. And then the challenge is, again, even at that stage, the mind can come in and claim some new identity. Especially if you get projections of other people. They project something onto you because they've sensed the power that comes through you, and they may equate that power with the form of the teacher. But the form is only the hole in the flute. The hole has also a form, it's round. Now this form is not round, it's a different shape, but it's the same. And so if you equate the power that comes through with the form through which it comes, then you will project an image onto the teacher of specialness. And that's quite normal for the mind to do. To believe that this form is special, must be more special than me, for example. Or I will also want to become as special as this one. And if a teacher is bombarded by projections of specialness for years, it's possible that he or she could succumb to the bombardment of specialness, and one day it could interfere with the teaching, and suddenly the teacher might say, I am the one. No greater teacher has ever been or will ever be than I. If it becomes, a distortion comes in. Yes, of course there is only one teacher ever, which comes through many forms. And then some form of specialness can creep in. It happens more easily to teachers who live only surrounded by devotees, disciples or followers, who don't do their own shopping anymore, who are totally sheltered and protected, and don't meet anybody else anymore except all these people who think this being is the one. And then they themselves don't realize that the same power that is in you, that even prevents you from realizing it in yourself. It's a great temptation for the teacher, and it's stopping you from realizing that which you're projecting outward. This is not to say that you cannot use the power that comes through the form of a teacher as a temporary help to draw out that which is also in you. So to be able to use the help that is there in the temporary form of the teacher, this is good. But not to confuse the power and the form. Some teachers free their students by dying. And at last the form has dissolved, and then some of their followers then suddenly realize, oh, I am the same. Okay, the microphone has reached.
Hi. I'm having more and more problem with planning, making planning and then having to follow up the things I plan. And to make an example, to come here was very difficult. I was happy where I was, very far, and in the last week I got very miserable and confused. Why should I go so far? And on to India afterwards and the whole thing. And I got confused at, for example, in the instance, what is it to surrender to the now? And also, what is it that, beyond what I think is right or wrong, what is it that make me move, finally?
Okay, thank you. When you are identified with a self, a mind-made self, a very common state is doubt. You are in doubt as to what to do. And some people remain in that state of doubt for a long time. Sometimes it's doubt with one reference to just one particular situation. Where should I live? Should I go to this retreat or should I stay home? And then you could sit and start to think about it. And it's agonizing sometimes to finally arrive at a decision. And even in the last moment when you pick up the phone and says, yes, I'm going, the last doubt creeps in and is, do I really want to go? And this is particularly, I mentioned this perhaps on the first day of the retreat. At every retreat, particularly retreats, and some people don't turn up and you don't know they're gone. And sometimes the organizer says they called up and they really wanted to come, and then suddenly they're gone, or they cancel at the last moment. Sometimes it's a true emergency and they cannot make it. But in other cases, here in this situation, something in you feels drawn here. That is the emerging presence. And something else in you doesn't want to be here. And even during this time here, you may feel the two. Something feels wonderful being here, and there's an opening, and something else, perhaps a mental commentary, is saying, what are you doing here? Or has doubts whether you even should have come. He says, is this really working? What's he talking about? Some kind of commentary, and you may shift between the two. At every retreat, quite a few people are prevented from coming because of arising doubt. And that is the mind really not allowing you to come to the retreat. And it uses doubt as a means of confusing you. And this is with in this particular situation. Now, what is the motive? In other situations, normal situations, you have to make decisions. Should I go there or not? Should I do this? What is the motivation for doing? In the normal dysfunctional state, the motivation for doing is some kind of need that through that situation I can add something to me, or some kind of fear. The doing comes out of the two movements of desire or fear. They are the motivating factors in the normal state of consciousness. And they may also cancel each other out. You may want to go to a dinner party, and you feel desire, maybe I will meet the one person who's going to make me happy there. So there's the desire movement, and then you're getting ready, you're getting dressed, and then comes in the fear movement. Maybe I won't meet him or her, and maybe I'll have to, these people will ask me questions that I can't answer. Maybe they know more than me. Maybe I'll feel inadequate there. Maybe fear. And you can sometimes remain immobile because fear and desire cancel each other out. In other cases, at some point, one predominates, and then you're moved into, you do it or you don't do it. You do it out of fear, or you don't do it out of fear. Or you do it out of desire, or you don't go there. Desire can be very, very strong. Desire is often mistaken for willpower. You could have, for example, a great desire for food, which is psychological. The body's need for food is limited. The mind's need for food is only one aspect of the mind's need for more. And if it's not more in some other area, it will take in more food. As long as it's more, it's a taking in of more, it's a psychological need, which is a very strong desire. And then some people go on a diet. They say, okay, and that's considered willpower. They have the willpower to say no to the food, and then they lose weight. But that's just a stronger desire. The stronger desire is to look attractive, to attract someone. And that desire cancels out the desire for food. So there's a continuous movement and fluctuation of desire and fear. And you move between the two. Desire implies future, more in future. So the doing is governed by needing to arrive at some point in the future, or fearing that point in the future, because the future is promising and threatening at the same time. It promises fulfillment. Perhaps I can complete myself, my story, my sense of self can be finally myself through more future, or the future is a threat because it might kill you. In one sense, it does, because eventually you die. So the little self needs the future and fears the future, but future is the dominant force that governs your actions. Now, is it possible, as the alignment with now arises, how do we live if we no longer have the psychological need for future? How are we going to be motivated to take action? And that is an interesting question. What replaces desire as a motivating factor, or fear as a motivating factor? Because some people work extremely hard out of the fear of being insignificant. Out of the fear of being nobody, they become millionaires. And for 30 years, all their energy came out of fear of not being good enough. And finally they build up an empire, big corporation is there. They've made thousands of people unhappy, including themselves. But they've created money, yes, and a lot of unhappiness. So at first, I didn't have a teacher. The shift happened to me suddenly, and it left me in a state of, one could say, an external observer would have said, a state of confusion, because suddenly I had no motivation anymore to do anything, because the future had become unnecessary. The psychological future had become unnecessary. The present was so deeply fulfilling that I said, why do anything? This is so beautiful. So I sat around for 2 years. Miraculously, I survived. And gradually, doing happened by itself. I found myself getting up, seeing someone, person coming to see me. Some doing arose that didn't have the future as a goal. It arose out of the joy of doing what you're doing at this moment, not out of the psychological need of future. Of course, in everybody's life, some planning is necessary. Everybody had to plan to come here. I had to put it in my diary a year before. It's already said, retreat in Italy. So that was, of course, future came in, but that kind of future is very easy. That you cannot avoid. It's called practical future. It's called clock time. You cannot avoid that living here. You can live in a monastery, and they wake up at a particular time. Tomorrow morning you are going to make breakfast, they say. Okay, that's time. You can't get away from practical time when you live in this world. And so even I wear a watch. Sometimes I hide it because so many people say to me, "Oh, you wear a watch? Why is that? Doesn't make sense." But it's helpful. If you don't wear a watch, that's fine too, but it helps me to get here on time. Otherwise, I might turn up an hour late, and I just drift in and say, well, there's no time. And some gurus do that. In India, they don't wear a watch, and there's one guru who could turn up at any time, and often during the night he doesn't sleep. He could suddenly turn up for satsang at 3 a.m. And so the followers wait around. No time has been specified. There's no structure. He could turn up at any moment. That's fine too. But this would not be possible there. This meeting would be difficult in that way. That's fine. Those structures work in that context. And here there are other structures where time is used. Time that is used for practical planning is simply totally unproblematic. You pick up a phone and say, book a flight for next week, whatever it is. But then the other time, the psychological time, the mental projection into some future moment, that is where the heaviness of future comes in. That's where time becomes a burden. That's where time becomes a desperate need for future. So how do you live when the shift happens? Well, psychological time becomes unimportant. Practical time you can still use. Now, when psychological time becomes unimportant, which is the great inner need for the next moment isn't there anymore, then action that arises out of you is no longer a means to an end. There may be an end, but the doing is always of greater importance than the arriving. You could find yourself writing a book. Don't write a book too soon, just wait a little. But you could find yourself, suddenly the writing happens. And that can be a powerful movement. In my case, it was a pen and notepad. For most people these days, it would be the computer. That can be a very powerful movement and very energizing when power flows into writing. An intense field of aliveness suddenly arises. That is deeply fulfilling in itself. Of course, the writing, you might say, I'm writing a book. It may become a book at some future moment, some future time. It may be a book. But now the writing is that I'm giving my full attention to that. If the writing is a means to an end because I want to publish a book, I also want to be a successful writer. That is a mind image, future, thought of future, where you see yourself as having achieved enhanced recognition through publishing a book. Then the writing is a means of getting you there. And you might put a lot of energy into it, but that energy comes out of, I must get there. And you could even write a very clever book, or book that contains a lot of thought, new thought structures, but not a truly alive book. The truly alive book that contains power comes out of the state of being aligned with now. And so the motivating factor for doing is no longer the pull towards future. The motivating factor is the joy, aliveness and fullness that is there in the doing. And that's, joy is an important part of that. Power also. So that replaces desire and fear, which are future pulls for doing. And any doing that comes out of that joy is also a doing. The doing that comes is no longer what it is that you need to do or that wants to be done through you, is not arrived at anymore through mental decision making, which involves a lot of doubt. When you start thinking, should I write a book or should I not write a book? On the one hand, if I write a book, I might lose 3 years of my life. Already an absurd thought, because you're already projecting that you're not going to enjoy yourself. You might spend 3 years of your life and you're projecting future. I might lose 3 years where I could earn money, and instead I'm going to write that book, which might not even get published. On the other hand, if I don't risk that, I'll get stuck with my job. So that requires a lot of thinking. And you wake up in the middle of the night, on the one hand, on the other hand. But then, what should I do? And then you can talk about it, think about it. And years could pass before you have decided whether to write a book or not. Not uncommon. This is just one example. Now, in the state of alignment, what it is that needs doing, or one could say that wants to be done through you, what it is, emerges, one could almost say, ready-made as a realization. This is what I have to do. It's spontaneous. The doing arises. In some cases it might mean leaving somewhere. We talked about that. You might be in your office and suddenly you get up and walk out. No decision making involved. Or the book, you might one day, you get a notepad and the pen and after one page you might know this is going to be a book, because you can sense the power that's in there. But you didn't sit down and try to decide, am I going to write a book or not? Suddenly the writing happens through you. And so spontaneity, also intuitive realizations, come out of the state of alignment with now. So that replaces the old way of doing, which is very problematic. And you know how problematic it can be. This yes, no, but, if, what if, and thought and thought and thought. Okay, there's another question. Oh, one more question in the back, and then the microphone will travel to you. Yes. Now, that's an interesting thought. This really isn't working. Now, if you recognize that as a thought, then you don't need to believe in that thought completely, because the mind will throw up all kinds of thoughts of a similar nature that are telling you that it's pointless, it's not working, or now, say yes to now, it says, no, not now. I will practice again tomorrow. The mind says, this is not the right moment. I have too much on my mind now. It just won't work. The mind has these thoughts and they will come up in you. If you don't recognize them as thoughts, then you're identified with the thought. And then you act on it, and each time the thought will say, give up, don't. You have too many problems to deal with. You just can't get into all that stuff about portals and all that. Just think about your problems. That's more important. And when a thought like that comes, you see the thought. And then you say, oh, there goes another one of those thoughts. Or you watch that. And that's already presence arising. The moment you even notice a thought as a thought, the simple fact of noticing that here's a thought, there's already the dimension of that is beyond thought, presence, arising, because it's through presence that you can notice the thought. So the very thought that is noticed, the thought that says, I can't remember what that thought, that there's no point, you might as well give up, or whatever the thought says, there's no point in all this. And as this thought is noticed, the seeing of it as a thought is the arising presence. In other words, as you see that thought, there is a space around the thought, and that is the witnessing presence. And then once you recognize that, the thoughts in themselves are no longer a problem, because you're no longer completely identified, or one could say, you don't believe in every thought as if it were some truth. It is the mind attempting to stay in control. It's only an energy movement. It has a momentum. And then comes the next thought that might say, whatever, I can't be present now. There's just too much going, so many disturbing things going on around me. Can't be present now. How could you be? It's impossible to be present here, not in this place. And then you watch that thought, and you're present. Yes, how would that look in practice? For example, what you're using the portal of...
Well, you're walking down the hill and you can see
Yes.
and you're saying, I must stop thinking.
Right.
Obsess about stop thinking can be, stop thinking becomes the thinking.
Yes. That's a good point. Now you may notice I would never say stop thinking, because that would be like saying don't think of a green elephant or pink elephant. There is the possibility that the state of thoughtless awareness may arise here through one of the portals. So, if you are looking at something, you may be looking at a tree, and then it's possible that thoughts arise that either have nothing to do with what you're looking at, or thoughts arise that are commenting on what you are looking at, or thoughts arise that are saying, I'm looking at this tree and I'm still thinking, but I shouldn't be thinking. It doesn't matter what kind of thought arises, even the thought that says, you see, you're still thinking, and you should be not thinking. No matter what the thought says, it's enough to recognize thought as thought, because that also is a portal. And now, at this moment, your mind is saying that this is not possible, which is another thought. So that thought loses its power to draw you in completely, to draw all your attention in completely. So, here goes another thought. You could say that, which is a thought also, but that can free you from taking the thoughts so seriously or regarding them as obstacles. Because when you regard thought as an obstacle that you need to overcome, you energize the thoughts. What happens when you use a portal like the inner body? Can you feel the aliveness in your body? No? Can you feel the aliveness in your right hand? No? No? If you closed your eyes, hold your right hand like this, without opening your hand, without opening your eyes, without moving your hand, without touching anything. You're not looking, you're not touching anything, you're not moving your hand. Can you know whether your right hand is still there or not? How can you know whether it's still there? Directly. Not as a memory, and I haven't yet met anybody who cannot feel a little bit of energy where there is a right hand. And you also, there's some energy there. It may not be much, yes. That is entering the inner body. And if you just hold attention there for a while, at least it's not in the head, it's there. Some thoughts may still happen, dance on the surface, but you've taken attention away from thoughts and it's there now. If you can feel one hand, you can feel other parts of the body, you can feel the other hand. You've entered the body. Once you've entered it, other parts you will also feel. It comes by itself. So that maybe certain portals work better for certain people. That's why there are more than one portal. They all take you to the same place. And that's why I recommend different portals, so that you can find the one that works best for you. It may well be that the one that you said you couldn't feel could well be the best portal for you. And so if you can feel that, that's all that's needed. Thought loses its importance when you inhabit the inner body, and it becomes an anchor for presence. So I would say the one that you haven't tried is the best one for you. And eventually all the portals take you to the same place. If you end up in the same place, one portal goes that way, one goes that way, goes that way, they all end up there. So which one you use doesn't matter. The one that works best for you. And for some it's sense perception, for some it's listening to silence, for some it's the inner body, for some it's to say, I allow this moment to be as it is. They all become portals that take you to the same place. So it works. And thoughts may still come in occasionally, which might say, I can't be in the body now, there's too much going on. And then you see the thought and you feel your right hand. Oh, we have clock time here.